When we think about motivation, we might think about money or rewards or personal goals. However, sometimes motivation can take larger forms and it can vary by person. Today, we'll talk about what motivation is, how it can be evoked, and how it impacts behaviors. Olympian Allyson Felix recently shared some of her motivations for running. She said, "When you see me run, know that I'm not running for medals. I'm running for change. I'm running for greater equity for each of us. I'm running for women. More than anything, I'm running toward a future where no woman or girl is ever told to know her place." As you can see from her quote here, motivations can vary and be measured in different ways. The formal definition of motivation is the process that energizes, guides, and maintains behavior toward a goal. So, drives motivate the satisfaction of needs, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means. So, we all have needs that we want met, right? That could be food, fresh air, meaningful connections. In this context, when we're in a state of need that needs to be met, we're referring to a state of biological or social deficiency, like perhaps a state where you're lacking food, you're lacking social support, or lacking safety. So it's this state of need that motivates us to engage in goal directed behaviors because unsatisfied needs lead to impairments in our physical and psychosocial parts of our life as well. But why do needs lead to changes in behaviors? Possibly because of drives and the need to maintain balance or homeostasis. So, drives are psychological states that create arousal. This arousal can be uncomfortable and can motivate a person or animal to satisfy a need by changing a behavior. Similarly, homeostasis, or the process of maintaining balance within the body, plays a part in drive. So, it's been proposed that when an animal or a human is deprived of a need like water or sleep, then a drive increases in proportion to that amount of deprivation. And then we use that drive and we behave in a way that satisfies and reduces that drive. So, as humans, we're motivated to reduce the drive and motivated to satisfy our needs. And this diagram from the textbook illustrates that clearly as well. So, for example, when we need oxygen or we're in a state where we're deprived of oxygen, we experience a drive or a state of arousal where we're feeling suffocated. And then that motivates behaviors that satisfy the need for oxygen. So, homeostasis, okay. So, we talked about drive as a state of arousal that motivates behavior. There is generally an optimal level of arousal where we're motivated and perform our best. So, this idea is known as the Yerkes-Dodson law, and this law states that performance on challenging tasks increases with arousal up to a moderate point. After that, performance is impaired by any additional arousal. So you can see here we have this inverted U that's representing our quality of performance. So when our arousal levels are low, our quality of performance tends to be low as well. But as our arousal increases and gets to around a moderate level, our quality of performance also increases and eventually gets to this high quality of performance or our optimal level of at our optimal level of arousal. And as your arousal increases, sometimes your quality of performance also decreases in response. So the easiest way to think about this is when you think about like stress in your performance on a test. If you're experiencing low stress or arousal about a test, you probably won't be motivated to study that hard and you probably won't perform that well. On the other hand, if you're too stressed or if If you're too stressed, even if you're motivated to do the work and study, you might not actually perform that well because you're preoccupied with your stress or not able to focus on the actual task or test that you're wanting to actually complete. But when you find that moderate level of arousal where you're stressed enough to study hard but still focus on your exam, then that's when your performance is the best. Lastly, it's important to note that the optimal level of arousal varies per person. So, some people find that higher levels of arousal are really appealing to them and motivating, like during skydiving. Your arousal levels are pretty high, or you're highly aroused because just physiologically you're experiencing like shock and a lot of very immediate changes in your body. But not everyone finds that level of arousal appealing or even comfortable, right? So the optimal level of arousal can vary per person. But the important thing to remember from this slide in particular is that the Yerkes-Dodson law proposes that a certain level of arousal, generally a moderate level, is going to be associated with like your highest quality of performance. And being too low or too high on those levels of arousal might not actually be helpful for your performance. So it appears that humans are motivated to fulfill their needs, but what needs get fulfilled first? Abraham Maslow proposed the hierarchy of needs in the 1940s and essentially posed that basic survival, such as physiological needs like hunger, thirst, warmth, air, sex, must be met before people can satisfy higher needs like belonging and love, or self actualization and living up to one's potential. So, this pyramid illustrates domains of needs with the highest priority at the bottom and lowest priority at the top. So, when we talk about self-actualization, we're referring to the stage where one's personal dreams and aspirations have been attained. And not everyone meets self or achieves self-actualization according to Maslow's theory. And over the years, the hierarchy has received some criticisms for disregarding nuances and simplifying human needs. For example, there are instances where one might be motivated to fulfill a need related to belonging and love or self actualization while they purposefully neglect their physiological needs or safety. For example, when someone might partake in a hunger strike or a protest they are where they might be risking their physiological needs or not satisfying those needs, but they're still performing in a way that is satisfying their need to belong, their need for, or their desire for self actualization. Another example of that might be if you think about artists or musicians trying to meet their full potential and attain their dreams of being a successful artist. They might not be addressing their physiological needs or safety again and might be more motivated to address those goals and aspirations they have rather than working to attain satisfaction in the more physiological domains. And are there any examples that you can think of that don't follow this hierarchy as well? Maybe take a second to just pause the video and think about that, because there are many, many examples that one could come up with. Not only do people have internal drives and arousal to increase motivation, but we also have incentives that can increase motivation. So incentives are external objects or external goals rather than internal drives that motivate behavior. There are two kinds of incentive motivation. There's extrinsic motivation, or motivation to perform an activity because of the external goals towards which that activity is directed. Some examples include working a job to get paid or studying to get a good grade. Intrinsic motivation is motivation to perform an activity because of the value or pleasure associated with the activity rather than feeling motivated for an apparent external goal or purpose. So, some examples of that might be painting for pleasure or spending time with grandparents or family members because you find joy in that, or it's just something that you value even though you're not receiving anything out of it. Perhaps if your intention was to spend time with your grandparents because you know they give you money for things, then that might be an extrinsic motivation because you're not motivated to spend time with them because of the value or pleasure. So, back to intrinsic motivation, it's thought to be particularly useful for satisfying curiosity and creativity, which are two pretty important traits for leading to problem solving and adaptation. So, that's just kind of helpful to think about in how intrinsic motivation might be useful for humans. So, rewards can definitely be motivating, but they can actually undermine intrinsic motivation. And when we're talking about intrinsic motivation, again, we're talking about that kind of um, internal motivation, the motivation that is derived from valuing or finding pleasure in something. So, external rewards can lower that motivation. And there's a few theories to explain why. So, the self determination theory poses that people are motivated to be in control by satisfying certain needs, and being offered a reward may make people feel like they aren't choosing to do something for themselves. So, if you like to play piano, but your mom asks you to play piano for the family at a function and offers you a few dollars to do that, you might not feel as intrinsically motivated because you aren't choosing to play. Rather, you are being motivated by a different kind of reward, which would be perhaps money in this instance. The self perception theory suggests that we aren't always aware of our motives, and so when we're being offered a reward, that might make us believe the reward is the reason that we're motivated, making us feel like the reward is greater than the goal of pure pleasure. I just inserted this video here that felt kind of relevant to self-determination theory, but it's also just kind of funny. So I'm going to play it really quickly and then try to tie it back to self-determination theory. So clearly, this person is playing the piano for his partner's family, and he's not really having a very good time. And perhaps we could attribute that to the fact that he was asked to play, and that kind of undermined his intrinsic motivation. And so it's just not really fun anymore, and he doesn't feel like he's getting to choose this for himself. So that was how I kind of wanted to tie in this video to intrinsic motivation. All right, so pleasure, pain, and approach or avoidance motivation. So Sigmund Freud proposed another principle related to motivation called the pleasure principle. This principle suggests that drives are satisfied by seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. This may help explain why humans behave in ways that aren't always biologically beneficial, like simple things like eating a dessert or just eating food when you're not hungry, or staying out late to party when your body needs sleep. So we're motivated to do things that bring us pleasure. We're not always doing things that are necessarily good or needed for our survival. Evolutionary psychologists also bring up how positive and negative incentives are adaptive. So, for example, we're motivated to approach certain things that are associated with pleasure, like food, sex, and companionship, but we're motivated to avoid negative things or things that are associated with negative outcomes and pain, like dangerous animals or risky situations or hurtful people, perhaps. So, we're motivated towards pleasure, and we're also motivated towards positive things and motivated to avoid negative things. People are also motivated to address long-term goals, not just short-term goals and needs like eating and drinking. So people are especially motivated to fulfill their personal goals, especially when they expect that their efforts will lead to a success. So this concept is considered or is known as self-efficacy, and it was posed by Albert Bandura. Um, and basically, the desire to do well or achieve something also motivates people to meet their goals. And this is known as an achievement motive. Delayed gratification, or postponing immediate fulfillment in the pursuit of long-term goals, has been identified as an important component of motivated behaviors and goal-directed actions. This is a big challenge of self-regulation, or the process of changing behavior to attain personal goals. So, delayed gratification could be foregoing the opportunity to go on a vacation because you want to save that money to buy a house in the future and be a homeowner. So, a study that was conducted in the mid and late 1900s suggested that children who displayed delayed gratification, or basically they waited for a larger reward rather than taking an immediate smaller reward, had better grades and SAT scores in the future. So this study is referring to a study by the researcher or developmental psychologist Michel. And this study uses the marshmallow task that you might have heard of before. And basically, in this task, children were offered a choice between one small but immediate reward, so basically they could get a marshmallow right then and there, or if they waited for about 15 minutes, they could receive two rewards or two marshmallows. So I'm just going to play a small clip here to give you an idea of what that looked like, and then I'll go back into the findings and more recent kind of adaptations of this study.
Alright, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? Alright. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
Alright, so it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
All right, so you get the idea of the task, and clearly this is something that can be hard to do. So actually delaying that gratification and following this goal that these children had set for themselves was still difficult to do, and they had to stay motivated to do so. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide really quickly and talk about those findings again. So according to the findings in the mid and late 1900s, those children who displayed delayed gratification and waited for the second marshmallow had better grades and SAT scores in the future. However, when the study was replicated with a more diverse sample, more diverse population, the findings only showed about half of the effect of the original study. Which suggested that there were other factors that influenced the delayed gratification, that influenced the outcomes over time as well. So this influenced kind of the start of, influenced like revisiting this study and redoing the study and considering how other factors play a part, like socioeconomic status, scarcity of rewards, and unreliability. So, in the revisited marshmallow task, the researchers take this into consideration, and I'll just play a little clip from that as well to illustrate that.
Task. I was like, what you want to do is you want to get the most amount of marshmallow possible, but there may be other considerations. Given that I have this one marshmallow now that's guaranteed, what are the chances that if I wait, there's going to be a second marshmallow later?
If it was a teacher he had all the time, that if they would have that trust bond a little bit longer, that he'd probably wait longer.
One of the lines of work that evolved as a result of the marshmallow task was to look at the outcomes of children's behavior later in life. But something that's been missing from the equation is this rational process by which children are accessing information in their environment and making decisions about whether they should behave in the short term or behave in the long term. So if they're in an environment in which long-term gain is very rare, well, then it makes perfect sense for them to behave impulsively because that's going to maximize their reward.
How's it taste?
All right, so that kind of summarizes the reason for revisiting the marshmallow task and redoing that study. Okay. So one final factor that we'll talk about in regards to motivation is the need to belong. So people behave in certain ways because they experience a need to belong. So this theory, the need to belong theory, proposed that the need for interpersonal attachments is a fundamental motive that has evolved for adaptive purposes. And this kind of explains how most people make friends easily, and that a lack of social contact can lead to feelings of emptiness and sadness. So we're motivated to keep social contact. We're motivated to avoid those feelings of emptiness and sadness. And from an evolutionary perspective, this theory is supposed to help us understand why, in general, we are pretty social beings as well. So humans may also be motivated to be with other people to manage their arousal. So a study done in the 1900s by Schachter found that increased anxiety led to increased affiliative motivations. So in other words, people who were in a high anxiety condition, who are experiencing a lot of anxiety, were much more likely to want to wait in settings with other people. And this might be because Other people provide us with information that helps us evaluate how to act and whether we're acting appropriately. So if we're really nervous or stressed out about something in an unknown scenario, it might be helpful to be around people who can kind of help us gauge out the situation, even if that's not done explicitly. So, affiliative motivations are a factor that is associated with this need to belong. Festinger's social comparison theory proposed that humans are motivated to have accurate information about ourselves and others, so we compare ourselves to those around us to test and validate personal beliefs and emotional responses. So, similarly, this motivation to affiliate with other people might be really relevant in ambiguous situations or unknown situations, so that we can compare ourselves with people who are similar to us and also kind of evaluate appropriate responses. So both of these theories have some things in common, but the most important thing about the social comparison theory is that the idea that being around other people allows us to compare ourselves with them, and that can help us test out and validate some of our beliefs and responses.